There's been a lot of changes being proposed to fix the sport of athletics, and it's all been really fascinating to see unfold in real time. It seems like every few months for the last few years, I hear about how the sport is in this perpetual state of underappreciation, and that there needs to be changes in order to return to those golden eras people refer to so often. Whether it's the Flojo era, the Carl Lewis era, the Bolt era, or if you're a distance guy, the Bekele, El Garouge, or Mo Farah eras. To their credit, there are a few problems within the sport even outside of just its popularity. Athletes are quite underpaid on average, meet broadcasts can be super one-dimensional, top-level athletes and hyped-up rivalries rarely all even come together to race outside of major championships, the sport can be way too confusing to follow, with all the different providers, lack of communication, and more, so it's not too surprising this sport can be difficult to enjoy at times, both for the athlete and the viewer. In the last year alone though, and really the last few months, there have been more major financial and logistical decisions made than we've probably seen in this sport in the last 10 to 20 years. This, of course, is great on the surface, and in a way, I'm pretty excited, but at the same time, a bit worried with all of the moving parts going about and the seemingly reactionary nature some of the parties involved are expressing. This is not going to be super structured, it's a bit rambly honestly, but nevertheless will have timestamps to stay somewhat intact. Honestly, this is just more or less a lot of pent-up thoughts I had about the future of the sport, so yeah, let's just get into it.
Pressure increases, but pressure make diamonds, and my name is Shine cause I shine, that's self-explanatory.
If you watch professional track and field meets that aren't championship races, you are probably familiar with the Diamond League Series, a chain of high-level races streamed and managed by World Athletics. You compete for cash prizes at each meet, and at the end, you can compete for an even bigger prize at their Diamond League final. Initially, these meets were exclusively held in Europe under the IAAF Golden League moniker, but World Athletics wanted to use the same format, except this time across the globe, which is why you see top-level athletes occasionally run in parts of Asia, Africa, and even the US with the pre-classic meet most of you are familiar with. There's also the World Continental Tour that houses some heavy hitters here and there too, along with some independently held meets as well, but the Diamond League is the most familiar and popular meet series among professionals and fans of the sport before championship events come around. As someone who started actively watching the sport again in the early 2020s, I could say there are a few things I enjoy about these meets. For one, they do manage to consistently fit everything into a nice, concise window. This does mean you won't be able to see every single event, but throughout the league, the more niche ones do still pop up enough for athletes and spectators to enjoy it. The change to make meets global is also a great move, as the fact that the US now has a premier hotspot where they can witness international competition, along with other countries outside of Europe, is fantastic. Outside of that though, there isn't a ton I can outright praise these meets for, as while they have hosted some beyond memorable races throughout their lifespan, I can't help but feel like their formula can run a bit dry and has trouble recruiting the fields it theoretically should at times. To start off though, the commentary is often just fine. Unless a historic record is being threatened, they're not whipping out any banger one-liners or projecting their voice in a unique and interesting way, as it's often just background noise or plain Jane analysis. They also tend to recycle the same commentators throughout an entire meet, or multiple meets rather, which I've always taken great issue with because I don't think it works that well with a sport like track and field, where you have so many different disciplines that require a specific way of explaining it. I think commentators like Tim Hutchings and Steve Cram have their moments, but that's a small crew to rely on. For a sport as diverse as athletics, and honestly, it can get a little tedious hearing two white dudes on the mic over the course of an entire summer. Field events also have an embarrassingly small presence throughout the meet streams and almost never have the time to be the focal point of the broadcast for more than a couple minutes straight. If you're from a country that has access to the YouTube streams, you can watch field events in full, but there's zero commentary and are not streamed in 50 or 60 FPS. Actually, I don't think any of their streams are in 60 FPS. Lastly, the pro fields assembled are all over the place. Very rarely do the best of the best go head-to-head more than once a year, as there's almost always multiple athletes missing. This makes it really hard for fans to get excited for the so-called rivalries they look forward to. As for example, we only got to see a duo like Sha'Carri and Julian Alfred race a single time before the Olympics. Between the 1500 meter titans, Jakob and Josh Kerr, they met at the pre-classic, and then we had to wait until August for them to race again at the Olympics. This could be chalked down to a few potential reasons. Athletes might not be getting big enough appearance fees to be bothered to show up. They might not just like the format of the Diamond League, whether it's the pay they get for winning races, or just the way the races are run to begin with. Or 3, they just don't feel like traveling to Europe if they don't feel like they have to. Or it's some weird combination of all of them. As a result, athletes often become rivals statistically rather than emotionally, making it annoyingly hard for fans to get invested into any sort of head-to-heads that could exist had these athletes met up more often. Also, yeah, the prize pools, they kinda stink too. I mean, $10K for winning a race against a world-class field? I guess to be fair, you're paying out money for a decent amount of events across a decent amount of meets, but still, I mean, it's gotta suck finishing 4th or 5th, which on paper is a great performance at a meet like this, but unless the appearance fee is good or you finish within the top 2, you are probably not going home with a lot of profit at all, which is funny because there are Diamond League races people will win or place top 3 in that almost mimic fields we'll end up seeing at the World Championships or Olympics, only to not even bring in 5 digits in prize money. There's a few other examples I can give, but the general gist is that despite being the premier series to race at before major championships, the Diamond League has not switched up their formula at all. And if they have, it's only been in very, very recent times, and the changes are minimal at best. Yeah, wave lights were their biggest addition by far, and were initially a cool idea, but now they're used far too much and have made races way too linear, but we'll touch on that more in a bit. However, I do think it's good that they're upping their prize pools again. I thought the Mondo versus Warholm thing was great, and the fact that they let it be streamed without a geolock was a great move, but it's not enough. The biggest thing people want to see is the best of the best going head to head with the athletes getting paid properly for their efforts, and that's pretty much it. This is where something by the name of Grand Slam track comes into play, and this is where things start to get pretty exciting, but also a little weird too. For those who don't know who Michael Johnson is, I'm not sure how you even came across this video then. He's the greatest 400-meter runner to ever live and was the greatest 200-meter runner of his era as well. The man was allergic to anything but a gold medal, as the double-digit golds he possesses now is one of the most unique and impressive accolades Mr. Johnson has out of any athlete in athletics and really sports history. I've kept tabs on him here and there on the occasion I check Twitter because he seems to be a decently vocal guy on any noteworthy track news that comes his way. After years of critical analysis on the ever-struggling track and field economy, he finally put his vocal nature to practice a few months back and announced a brand new track league called Grand Slam Track, which does seem to take direct inspiration from the Grand Slam Tennis Tournament series. It first made waves through a Forbes article where Johnson claimed to have snagged a nice $30 million in funding for it. He also went on ESPN to talk about it, and around this time would do a formal video announcement too, laying out the groundwork for why any and everyone should be competing at and watching this series. The claims Johnson makes about this league are pretty hefty, but he does really try and back it up quite well with a catalog of features that make this event attractive. First off, the prize pools are pretty damn solid. Compared to Diamond League races, they're making everything else look like your local turkey trot in terms of what you can expect to win here. Not only do they plan on inviting plenty of the top athletes from various disciplines too, but they'll even receive contracts so that they're committed to the 4 meets that the series will hold. The events span from the 100 meters all the way up to the 5,000 meters, but how exactly those will be run is something we'll touch on soon. Their poster athlete for Johnson's new league was a fantastic first choice, and that was no other than Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone. And then shortly after, Josh Kerr was announced too. These are 2 big and amazing names to start off with, don't get me wrong, but in a way, it's kind of funny because these 2 have the most campy racing schedules in modern track and field, but I mean, I guess it's good they're contractually obligated to show up and race their main discipline more often now. After the initial release of all of this information, track fans everywhere bombarded social media posts and forums, as some were beyond excited, some had a couple questions, and others seemed actually a bit worried or were just not a fan of the idea at all. In all fairness, the concept of a brand new track league of this magnitude hadn't hit the scene since the Diamond League's inception in 2010, which in reality was just an adaptation of the previous existing IAAF Golden League. There was a lot to unpack, and as I'm currently writing this, they've laid out a good bit of information now that I think is enough to see if it's worth getting excited for, and if it will have any lasting impact on the future economy of track and field. Let's see what might slam, and let's see what might not hit as hard. Grand Slam Track's mission statement is that it plans on recruiting the absolute fastest athletes and plans on capitalizing off of just about any and every rivalries in the sport. Given the fields GST have recruited as of now, it seems like they've done a great job at cultivating world-class showdowns. And given we don't know who any of the challengers are yet, I'd imagine these fields will only get more and more exciting to look forward to. Now for the shmoney. You're guaranteed money just by even competing at these meets with only 8 spots open, as the fact that 8th place nets you a nice check of $10,000 is a pretty great start for a brand new league, with the winner getting a healthy 6 figures. That's not even including their contracts either. The fact that just being a part of these races will get you more money than winning a Diamond League race is a fantastic step in the right direction, and I think it will incentivize much more honest competition, not just in the front, but hopefully in other aspects of the race as well. This one can be perceived as pretty superficial, but it's something that I think can be an underrated gem if done properly. I enjoy the sense of freedom athletes will now supposedly have when it comes to embracing whatever identity they want to not just have as an athlete, but as a brand too. I can only imagine what someone like Sha'Carri would do if she had the complete freedom to design whatever racing outfit she wanted. Same can go for Noah or a lot of the more extroverted stars that want to bring a bit of flair to the scene. That is if these mentioned people get signed up for this, but fingers crossed. Lastly, with FloTrack taking over the Diamond League rights for US viewers, this will be a fantastic alternative to threaten the company further, and to hopefully either force them to lower prices to compete with the soon-to-be changed market, or to just, give up the rights entirely and go extinct as a company, but whatever, I'll take what I can get at this point. We'll get what I feel like is the most important one out of the way, and that's how the athletes will be racing. From a spectator's point of view, I really don't like this idea, and from a competition perspective, it gets a little tricky as well. In short, contracted athletes must race 2 events at the 4 slams that will take place, as they are assigned to a specific racing category. Some are quite reasonable, like the 100-200 double, the 400-meter hurdles, flat 400 double, the 3,000-5,000 for the distance fellas, but the rest to me seem a little off. Let's start off with the flat 100, 110 hurdles double. From what I understand, just about all the fastest hurdlers this year only do the hurdles. You might find them doing like a flat 60 indoors here and there. Maybe there's an outdoor 100 sprinkled in, or if you're JCQ, you're somehow a beast in the 200, but the majority of them exclusively do hurdles and nothing more. Now, I'm sure with these prize pools, they'll feel more inclined than ever to iron out their flat speed, but that's kind of the thing. It's weird to me that in order to maximize their chances at placing well in these, which arguably have more value than championship medals given the prize pools here, they'd have to potentially sacrifice a bit of hurdle time in order to iron out their flat speed. With the 400 hurdles category, it's different because the technicality is far less important compared to the extremely precise nature of the high sprint hurdles, but maybe they can work it into their training and are probably just naturally fast enough to run a good flat time. But I'd rather just see 2 high-quality hurdle races in a row instead of some likely underwhelming flat 100s. Then we have the 200-400 combo. You would think this one makes sense, but then you look at the top 400 runners' best 200-meter times, some of which are a little outdated to be fair, and you can see why this combo might be a bit odd too. The 400 is for the most part a very specialist-oriented event, and very rarely will you find an athlete who is even capable of excelling in both. We've seen 200 runners throw out insane 400 times, primarily in the form of a relay split, but you're not going to find a strict 400 specialist moving down to the 2 and putting up anything that promising in my opinion. Not sure how this one's going to work out either, to be honest, as I feel like this is just free money for Let's Late de Boho and Gabby Thomas, the only notable active 1-2-4 hybrid sprinters, but who knows, maybe this one can turn out well, and maybe there are some secret killers in this category that I just don't know about yet. Lastly is the 800-1500 combo. This is my least favorite one by far from a spectator standpoint and as someone with a slight distance bias, because the only time 1500 runners do the 8 is just for general speed work and nothing more, unless you're Hobbs Kessler or Georgia Bell, but even then it's very clear which event they excel in more. In most cases, these athletes are not running a promising 800, and these athletes are probably not running a promising 1500 either. Like watching Josh Kerr run a 145 at best, no offense, genuinely sounds like the most boring thing in existence, while he gets demolished by every 141 or 142 guy, and the same can be said about Wanyoni probably burning out 1K in the 1500, while Kerr, Hawker, and a couple others fight for their spots. My prediction and worry is that these races will be incredibly lopsided and won't be anywhere near as competitive as they're theorized to be. Why not just take the Diamond League fields from the 800 and 15 and throw all of them into their respective categories for GST? Now, I know what you've been thinking this entire time, but Johnson talked about how this is for competition and not about times. The competition 100% matters, and I think there's a charm to seeing athletes compete in slightly unorthodox events, but on paper, it seems like this format is just going to create very lopsided competitions and underwhelming performances in some categories, and to an extent banks on athletes specifically training for their weaker events just to be even remotely competitive. Which again, I think is such an odd concept because I'd imagine they want to be as sharp as possible in their primary discipline before major championships. Also, side note, I also hate the fact that we're just throwing out the concept of times being important or entertaining, as if those aren't part of the reason why the sport is as accessible and attractive as it is in the first place. People like competition and tactical races for sure, but there's also times where they want to see them run pretty damn fast. If this league is built for current fans of the sport, we should be putting athletes in situations where they can be competitive and fast. I think this league would be infinitely more enjoyable if they just ditched the double event format entirely. It's truly my least favorite thing about this league by far. Getting rid of wave lights and pacers is a great choice, but this whole category shtick is just a giant gimmick that I feel like won't be executed anywhere near as well as GST thinks it will, which is funny because I think their whole premise is that there are no gimmicks in the first place and that it's a fan-focused event. I'm sorry, but what fan asked for this? I could be wrong, but I'd imagine fans would much rather see world-class fields within their specialties as opposed to seeing them run their main event and then run kind of mediocre in another. I think what they're going for is that they want to put on a more unique show where athletes are pushed out of their comfort zone and are creating never-before-seen matchups while also having the best talent present. But again, I fail to see why this is somehow better than just creating stacked races between event specialists. And let me reiterate, this is not going to be an issue for every single category, just a select few. But going back to what I was saying, if an athlete wants to race in multiple events, sure, let them do that, but forcing it upon them is a very strange move, and I wish I had a proper answer on why they even chose this format in the first place. Lastly, the fact that there's no field events was kind of predictable, but nevertheless a bit disappointing still. For those who say field events aren't marketable or interesting, first off, you're wrong. But secondly, I feel like they could have at least added the long jump or the shot put, and to just stream it on a second feed, or found a way to fit it within the allocated time window for the main one. I mean, these meets are supposedly 3 days long, 3 hours each, and you're telling me there's no way to fit in a single field event? After all, there's a good chunk of money being poured in here, and I'd imagine they're securing more funding as we speak. And the sport has a healthy amount of stars on the field that would create some sort of fun polarization instead of seeing people on the track over and over again. Not to mention, almost all these track events are like, I don't know, 5 minutes max? So what the hell are you going to do to fill in hours of dead time anyways? Johnson has gone on record more or less stating that field events are a lost cause, which is kind of insane to hear from someone who's supposed to be so well versed in marketing. I'm not here to convince him to include field events, nor am I here to make this a video about why field events could be marketable. It's his league at the end of the day, but I don't like the way he interprets field events as this unsalvageable genre that totally doesn't have plenty of stars dying to be put into a light that showcases their talents in a focused manner instead of being temporarily on screen for 30 seconds at a time. It's almost like part of the reason they're underappreciated is because no one has taken the risk yet to let people appreciate them.
Overachiever, nobody believes her. Pray to a false god until my knees hurt.
Now, it might seem I'm being overly critical of GST, especially since it hasn't technically taken form yet, but part of the reason I'm being as harsh as I am at times is because of the way this league is being framed in the first place. Michael Johnson often attributes his Grand Slam series as effectively being the savior of track and field. I find this really grating and obnoxious, and I'll explain why. You can argue part of it sounds like a marketing shtick, sure, but a good portion of it seems like he genuinely believes that. I've also heard him say multiple times along the lines of, oh, the sport is only relevant during the Olympics, so we're gonna change that with GST, and it's like, let's relax a little. First off, the Olympics have been considered the pinnacle of sporting competition for well over a century now, as it's the time where sports of all types get to shine. We have a pseudo-Olympics almost every year. It's the World Championships, and soon to be World Ultimate Championships for those off years, and videos of these games still garner millions of views, just like the Olympics, and in recent times have hit record high viewing numbers. Yeah, we're not hitting the absurd live numbers as the Olympics, sure, but what are you expecting? How many people watch the Super Bowl compared to your average American football game? Or how many people watch the World Series compared to your average baseball game? Like, yeah, the proportion of Olympic viewers compared to non-Olympic meets is larger than other sports, but even then, I'm not saying we don't need or can't make improvements during pre-competition meets. We absolutely do and should. But I think this argument is so misleading since it completely undersells how mainstream viewership works in the first place, and to think GSD can replace that on a whim, or even within years down the line, is so detached from reality, especially when you realize the time frame of when these meets are being held in the first place. I'm also not sure exactly who their social media guy is, but a lot of the content they're putting out to try and market their brand aren't really doing it either. I really appreciate the effort because I can tell they're clearly trying to do it in a trendy, approachable manner, but it just comes off as a little derivative, and especially gets beyond repetitive. During a time as hot as the Paris Olympics, they were kind of just prioritizing quantity over quality, and very rarely did they have anything land on the algorithm to get their brand out there. And they haven't changed that at all since. Just recently, they had tons of world-class athletes in a massive studio, and you might think they had a lot planned. From what they've released so far though, they just shot a bunch of interviews, and took a lot of pictures. I'm not saying these are amazing ideas I'm proposing, but for example, why not do like a Jeopardy style show with Johnson hosting and some athletes participating? Or maybe play a game of Mafia and stream it on every GST social media throughout the days they're there. Hell, invite some big influencers for an hour or so, have an athlete teach them how to do their event, and do some mock races between some of the athletes. I'm not saying these would 100% work, but things like this have been tried in other communities before, and they've shown to work pretty damn well when it comes to introducing people to things and just making fun and successful content. Imagine Will Tennyson, Mitchell Hooper, Eddie Hall, or someone like that giving these guys a lot of press for just appearing in a single YouTube video. I'm sure some of these guys follow the sport in some capacity. They'd probably love to show up. Just look at Noah's video he did with speed. I feel like there were just a lot of missed opportunities to get some of their socials off the ground and to actually create something accessible to the random algorithm stumbler, but instead it's just a lot of filler. And that's a budget that I just feel like went to waste because the only successful social they have is on Instagram. And that's not necessarily because of their marketing. Honestly, I would be surprised if 90% of the current following for Grand Slam aren't already people who follow the sport at least somewhat closely. Most of the time they get followers on Instagram, it's just due to Sidious Mag reposting about an athlete getting signed, and since the athlete themselves are tagged in it, followers of those people also see it and hop on over. I know they're probably banking on gathering numbers when the meets actually get underway, and again, I understand that this is a work in progress and that it might take years on years to get this thing off of the ground, but on your first go, you want to have as many people on board as possible beforehand, and I genuinely feel like they're just wasting time and resources on, frankly, the most boring shit possible. Also, can we please just acknowledge just how manufactured these quotes are from these athletes whenever they get signed? No one talks like this. It's nitpicky, I know, but why can't we just get more authentic opinions from them instead of these weirdly robotic, on-the-nose renditions of GST's mission statement 20 different times? I just came across this as I was about to start editing. I just found out now that they were actually view and like botting their YouTube stuff, obviously to make themselves look better, which is wild because they somehow managed to get this channel verified as well. I don't know who I should be more annoyed at, GST for the engagement bots or YouTube for verifying an account for using bots. This is also not the first startup track and field company I've seen do this either, which is also a strange coincidence. Whatever, I just wanted to point that out. Lastly, and as of recently, GST announced their 4 locations for this year, and 3 of them appear to be in the US. And the other one is in Jamaica, which I actually think is an amazing place to have one, because have you seen the crowds there before?
It's coming by him. Oblique Seville produces a stunning performance of sprinting by Oblique Seville. The world champion Noah Lyles. We're a lead.
They were supposed to have one in London, but UK athletics weren't really interested, citing financial risks, partially due to reserving their funds for a world championship bid, but also because I think UK athletics is down to shitter as it is anyways. Most of these meets are interestingly very early in the season, one of them being in April, so it doesn't directly interfere with most of the Diamond League schedule, so I guess that's good in a way. With all of that in mind, Grand Slam track is a 3-day meet with, frankly, gimmicky doubles thrown in during a part of the season where the athletes likely won't be in that good of shape anyways. There's also no European interest whatsoever, and I'm supposed to acknowledge this as the savior of track? I mean, I don't know. I want to look forward to GST and obviously I'm still gonna watch because I'm very curious, but I wish this was proposed in a more honest and self-aware manner. And of course, I wish the double event thing didn't exist at all. If Johnson just said, hey, I want to host a high-stakes early season track league that'll be fun for the fans and nothing more, I wouldn't even be 5% of annoyed as I am now with it. But because Johnson wants to tout himself as being such a savior, despite many aspects holding that sentiment back, I feel like I have every right to judge it based on his own very, very high standards. I'll close my thoughts out on GST with that I still absolutely love Michael's initiative to raise money for the sport, to compete with a federation that doesn't do its job properly. But the execution is really bizarre, and the fact that he thinks an American-centered, early season track league will be the ticket to worldwide Olympics tier fame is really silly, even considering 5 to 10 years down the line. But in a way, I guess I want him to prove me wrong then. It's probably going to be fun, but in my opinion, let's dial it back a bit.
Exotic Hermes, this a crap. Watch too expensive, ain't no way I'm getting clapped.
When I first heard about Athlos in July, spearheaded by former chairman of Reddit, Alexis Ohanian, I actually thought the idea was pretty sick. Recruit a bunch of the top women from the sport, throw them into a condensed meet, throw in a solid prize purse, and see what happens. Oh, and also you get to watch Megan Thee Stallion afterwards too. I mean, that sounds pretty fun to me. What did confuse me a bit was the heavy emphasis on supporting women's track because, unless I'm just missing something, isn't track and field like one of the few sports where things are on fairly equal ground? Like, aren't a healthy bunch of the social media titans that are getting all sorts of brand deals and global traction on the women's side of the sport? I don't know. I'm genuinely not trying to be facetious or ignorant here, nor am I trying to mansplain women's athletics. There is some nuance I'm likely missing. I do acknowledge the blatant pay difference and popularity issues between men and women in a lot of other sports, but I guess I never pinned athletics as one of those. Mainly since, to my knowledge, funding is a much more systemic issue in track and field. I did contact a former Olympic woman medalist in the sport, and she told me that in something like the marathon at least, men were getting paid more for something like appearance fees and contracts, but then in other areas, it seems like it can actually go the other way, so honestly, I have no idea. Before we get off topic though, like I said, this meet was pretty cool. The production was such a refreshing switch up. I love the cutbacks to the commentary where we can actually see their faces and feel their excitement. The commentary felt tastefully high octane and engaging the whole time. The races, of course, were fun to watch. Also, Sean Evans and Flavor Flav were there. I really enjoyed this format for what it was, even if the cutaways and commentary dragged a little bit at times. People seem to really not like that part, but given this is probably a once or twice a year type of meet, I don't think it's that big of a deal when the focus is just to be a laid-back event celebrating the accomplishments of women in the sport. To anyone who whines about a half-serious, half-for-fun women-centered meet being a waste of time, or even is going as far as to call it discriminatory, just go watch a Diamond League meet then. No one's forcing you to watch this. With all that said, like GST, Ohanian also unfortunately kind of touts this as a potential lifesaver for track, which again, I think is such an annoying thing to do because it takes away from the identity of what this meet was supposed to be. A fun-ass competition meant to celebrate women in the sport. He stated that there were 3 million viewers for Athlos, which was a number that seemed pretty bullshitty, and when I looked into it, it kind of made more sense. There's no way 90% of their viewers came from Twitter. I'm pretty sure these views were either bugged or were counted when someone even scrolled past it or something. Like, I think the way stream viewers work for Twitter is way different than anything else. At this point, every track league was over, so 3 million just seems so unrealistic given Athlos barely had a 5-digit following in the first place. I also thought it was a little bizarre that Michael Johnson didn't acknowledge Athlos in any capacity, especially since it included athletes that are now a part of GST. Like, he did not congratulate any of the athletes involved or the fact that Ohanian basically did some of the dirty work and gave this different type of production and meet structure a proper test run months and months before GST even will. Like, this is great data for them. Ohanian did eventually tweet at Johnson about some alleged conflicts of GST athletes supposedly needing Johnson's permission to compete at other meets, and from what I understand, Johnson just didn't respond at all. From this alone, it seems like there's clearly animosity between the two, and both of them seem like they're trying to make this a dick measuring contest instead of trying to come together to solve a united issue within the sport. Finding that out really sucks, to be honest, but I mean, there's really not a lot you can do there. Honestly, I have no idea what Athlos is doing in the future. Their socials are still relatively active, so clearly they have more in store. I just don't know if it's going to be post-championship meets only, or if they actually plan on interfering with GST's schedule.
Rap snitches, telling all their business, sit in the court and be their own star witness.
To bounce off of the notion of competition and conflict, the existence of multiple leagues will incentivize previously existing leagues to adhere to the standards of what is perceived to be the biggest threat. Grand Slam track, whether World Athletics likes it or not, is a huge threat to them at the moment despite the meets not even happening yet, and it's very clear they're trying to take some kind of action to even stay within the realm of what GST is bringing to the table. This, in theory, is actually fantastic. It's great to see more money being put into the top level of the sport, and it's great to see these federations being pressured more, because unless you're the outright best in the world, you are going home with almost pennies in the Diamond League. Sure, it doesn't address financial issues on a systemic or developmental level within the sport, and you can make the age-old argument of trickle-down economics not being the best proposal, but listen, a win is a win for now. My personal worry as a viewer, however, is that will we even see GST athletes compete at non-GST events? And if we do, how often is it going to be? Let's tackle the notion of expected value, or EV. During your season as an athlete, your EV as an athlete goes up depending on how valuable the race is and how prepared you are for it. Athletes that can afford to stay in good shape all year, like Jakob, knows it's plus EV to race year-round and then still make some magic happen at major championships, while others generate more EV by having a more reserved racing schedule and putting most of their eggs in one basket when the Olympics or World Championships come around. Both types of athletes, though, at least have the freedom and, more importantly, the energy to take part in the various types of events offered. But with GST, I start to become a bit more worried, especially since I already despise the racing format as it is. In Grand Slam track, contracted athletes will be racing 8 times from April through June. I don't care what event you are doing, that is a lot of racing throughout a short period of time, especially if you're on the distance side. And the thing is, unlike Diamond League season openers where they are mostly just rust busters, GST's prize pools are so massive compared to anything these athletes have ever competed in before that it becomes infinite EV to train their asses off and to try to maximize their profits at these events. Honestly, it's like competing in championship effort 8 separate times months before the actual championships come around. That sounds exhausting. Not to mention, most athletes aren't even racing 8 times a year in general. Aside from the hurdlers, I can barely think of a single athlete where we've seen them race in more than 8 separate finals. So am I only going to see them in GST's racing format, nationals, that is if those nationals are being streamed for that specific athlete, and then the world championships? I don't want that. Like, yeah, we've established that the Diamond League isn't perfect, but I still like seeing athletes try to run as fast as they possibly can and go for records. Because trust me, that's very likely not going to happen during GST given how early the meets are, and the heavy incentive to run a tactical race in the longer events due to the much larger prize pools. I understand what I'm saying is purely hypothetical, but let's entertain this part. Is it even worth a GST athlete's time after racing in the league to race before championships? Is it not just way higher EV to just cash everything out from Grand Slam track and then to just strictly prepare for championship events? Maybe using a single Diamond League race as a tune-up beforehand? I would wager that's the best move to make. But I don't have the actual words from these athletes to confidently say that. This is where I actually think being a challenger has its perks if you want to race different styles, because you're not contractually obligated to be there at every race. Let me close out my incredibly lengthy and unnecessarily rambly thoughts about GST with this. It is very likely going to be a net benefit for the sport overall, but I personally hate the way athletes will be competing. I think the complete neglect for field events is unfortunate too, and I'm not a fan of the way Johnson purports himself as a savior of the sport when this hasn't even been put into practice yet, combined with the fact that it doesn't address financial support on the developmental side on the sport, and considering the meets are happening during a time of the year where track is normally not that hot. However, GST as a concept is already enough to threaten other areas of the sport to adapt and pour money in, which is great. The people behind GST clearly care about wanting to make the sport a better place, or at least rather a part of the sport more popular and accessible, and they clearly have a lot of ideas to try and make it a fun and enjoyable experience. And it very likely will be. I'm not going to be sitting in my chair all mopey, hate watching GST. I'm probably going to have a very fun time seeing athletes compete in disciplines they normally don't, and appreciating these stacked fields they're going to be bringing to the table too. I just think they could be getting so much more bang for their buck out of this league, and I wish it was marketed in a much more honest manner. I truly wish Johnson the best of luck, and that they could get this thing off the ground on their first go, so the sport could potentially prosper more and more in the coming years. The more I write about these leagues, the more I've come to the realization that none of them do track and field truly right, in my opinion. I'm probably going to be repeating a few things, but bear with me here. Athlos is really close to what I have in mind in terms of a perfect meet, but it's a little too much filler and cuts out way too many events for me to be fully on board with it. Before Wavelights took over the brains of World Athletics executives, you would still have pacers here and there for races that were going for world or meet records, but this wasn't a thing for every single solitary meet. You had races where it was just fast people dictating how they wanted the race to go at every waking second, or if they did have a pacer, it wasn't for the entire thing, and the race would unfold a bit more naturally. So, can someone tell me why Sebco fetishizes Wavelights so much to where we need them for every single race 400 meters and up? I thought they were a neat tool to use for world record specific attempts, and even made a video praising the technology to an extent. But now it's so overused, overbearing, and has just overall lost its initial charm and identity that it had when it first hit the scene. A production crutch, if you will. Some athletes and fans have been very critical of Wavelights, some which have legitimate points, while others are just angry boomers yelling at a cloud. When the fields are loaded and people race fast, sure, it's great, but that's not because of Wavelights. That's because the race is good. When you see every single race paced to a specific tempo, and then they just kind of run fast, but like not fast enough to where you're super amazed, and it's this really linear descent into anaerobic hell where no intense moves can be made, then congrats, you've effectively killed an entire style of racing and a part of the sport that people could have enjoyed. Balance is key, but World Athletics doesn't seem to understand that. And again, we have GST, which is also doing it wrong too, in my opinion. This was the utmost perfect opportunity to bring together the best athletes in the world, throw them all in a race in their best discipline for great prize pools, and just let them do whatever the hell they want. No wave lights, no anything, just pure racing on fresh-ish legs. I just don't care what Grant Holloway runs for an open 100 or what Paulino can run in the 200. I just want to see them absolutely rip their main event apart against the best in the world. Everyone seems to want to overcomplicate track meets, and I just don't understand that at all. Just get the best athletes in the world together, throw them in their best event or events, and that is it. It's an unbeatable method. I don't see an alternative that somehow works better than this. Aside from, I don't know, celebrity racing or something. I could see that getting more views.
I gotta get away from that bullshit that they on. I gotta get away from that bullshit that they on. I gotta.
Since we're kind of on the topic of world athletics, what the fuck is going on over there? You announce something cool, then you ruin it, or you're just announcing something to announce something and it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. What is going on in the noggins of executives there that think any of these ideas are cool or are healthy for the athlete and spectators overall? Let's start off with the World Ultimate Championships. As in between the World Championship and Olympic years, there's always this really awkward dead zone in between where there's no big championship to look forward to, and athletes are kind of just racing just to stay fit until the next one comes around. The prize pools for this are pretty damn hefty compared to anything we've ever seen the Federation propose before. 150K for first is basically unheard of for this sport in recent times, but there's a few glaring differences between this and the traditional World Championships we're used to. For starters, this only spans 3 days. Gone are the early rounds of events, and we're hopping right into the semifinals at the very least. Okay, cool. These days are also compacted into 3-hour windows as well, so you're expected to tune into 9 hours of pretty good action. Alright, so far so good. Next, they're adding a new event, the mixed 4x100 relay. Alright, I guess. What else? Oh, and also they're gutting the 3,000 meter steeplechase, the 10,000 meters, the men's triple jump, the women's hammer throw, the marathon, and have gotten rid of both 4x4s entirely. I think as a normal viewer, we see an event like this and just go, oh cool, a lot of money on the line and a concise window to watch some championship tier races. And that's a completely valid way to feel and is probably how most casual track fans perceive this news in the first place. However, in the perspective of an elite athlete and a viewer who appreciates the sport as a whole, especially for events that were left out here, I cannot stress enough how shitty it is to just eradicate entire disciplines for athletes who have well over a decade invested into the sport, only for their talents to effectively go to waste for an entire year, all because of some superficial viewpoints on the sport not being TV friendly enough. Have you seen how long chess streams are? And look how much coverage those things get. Athletics is like the one sport too where we've actually been able to represent men and women pretty well. So what in the world are we doing ambiguously cutting out events for certain genders? Removing the 4x4 is also comically unhinged, by the way, as they replaced it with the mixed relay, because the conventional 4x4s totally weren't known as some of the most iconic events to watch in athletics history. Like, they are the closer to a track meet. Everyone knows that. Ever since the mixed relay came around, people have just been like, okay, it's cool, but like, you can't just bank on the Netherlands and USA carrying it every year. Literally just a couple years ago, record viewing numbers were set for the World Championships, and those things are 10 days long. Why not just refine that formula instead of drastically altering it beyond recognition and kicking tons of athletes out from representing their countries and their events? I really hope they reconsider this decision. Like, you can't just throw in a few separate stream feeds for throwing events. Trust me, if you tell field events where to watch something, it spreads around quickly. They will take any opportunity to watch a full field stream if they can. This new trend of cutting a drastic amount of events for the sake of screen time is such a toxic solution to a problem that I don't even think exists in that big of a capacity in the first place. The sport is messy by design, I get that, but I'm certain there's a better way to work around that than booting out entire genres of the sport from major events, even if they'll still exist in other ones. Preet Majitia over at Cities Mag wrote about the World Ultimate Championships just recently and made an observation that I didn't even realize until reading back at the WC's format. Cutting out tons of events with a focus on shorter track disciplines, the 3-hour windows, it's also a 3-day meet. Are they really trying to create a direct copycat of GST? I am honestly floored just how much power this league has despite not even being put into practice yet, because the fact that World Athletics is just willing to axe certain events on a whim for a championship event to compete with a league that technically doesn't even exist yet shows how desperate the Federation is to maintain relevancy and to appear trendy, instead of coming up with original solutions that refines a formula that does work but just needs some honest tuning and fresh perspectives without sacrificing the integrity of the sport. Tangentially, they also entertained the idea of a World Treadmill Championship. I'm gonna be honest, I can't even explain this one. I saw some people reference that they might be trying to piggyback off of something like the High Rocks Championships, which from what I understand is just some boring ass CrossFit shenanigans that no more than a couple thousand people want to watch. Just because a lot of people do something doesn't mean they want to watch other people do it. Like, come on now. That's like saying people who work on spreadsheets all day want to watch the World Excel Championships.
This entire case.
Oh, yes. See, there's it. See,
Wow.
these,
Okay, maybe those are kind of cool, but you get the point. I also want to briefly revisit my thoughts on the track lab thing they did last year because in hindsight, I feel like I was being way too nice. Looking back, they did literally the bare minimum with some of their ideas, like using the dollar store flags or thinking that getting rid of the false start rule entirely was good, even though they literally didn't even get to see if the idea worked in the first place because they tried it out on literally one single event. I'm starting to realize there's just a blatant laziness to World Athletics at times that I don't really understand. And it's evident through their one-dimensional content style, their slew of pointless ideas and changes, their reactionary move to copycat GST in fear of them stealing any potential athletes or viewership. It's just, I don't know the word. Embarrassing, maybe? I mean, that sounds a little mean, but I don't know. I don't know what's going on over there, but they need to fix their shit and fix it soon. I'm glad they're making changes, but they need some other people to be like, hey, maybe we should step back and refine this a little bit. Do I think track and field as a whole is going to be hurt by these changes in the coming years? I want to wager, probably not. In fact, I think the likelihood of a popularity increase is more evident than ever with the financial advancements the sport seems to be cultivating. However, I definitely think things are going to be a lot stranger given the addition of GST, the seemingly mysterious re-entrance of Athlos next year, and the reactionary nature of World Athletics shitting themselves at the thought of slowly falling off of relevancy. Yeah, it's gonna be a bizarre next few years to say the least. I feel like as track and field fans, we're very quick to blindly get behind anything new that hits the sport, and in all these cases, we should be to an extent. But this is where we can miss out on a lot too. We should be excited and for the most part support something new and interesting when it's announced. But if applicable, we should also be very critical of it since we only get so many opportunities to fine-tune these ideas before it lifts off the ground. After all, you want to make sure these things leave a fantastic first impression, and is why I'm being as critical as I am of some of these leagues while they're in their earlier stages. Diamond League, y'all don't really get a pass though. You guys are way more behind than you should be. Now, do I think any executive or someone is going to acknowledge a single thing I'm saying? I'm gonna say probably not. But like I said, this video was just an excuse for me to air out a lot of stuff I had going on in my noggin. I don't know. Hopefully you found my rambling interesting too. I'll definitely be keeping tabs on the comments under this video because I'm sure there are a lot of people who are way smarter than me when it comes to logistical and financial shenanigans like this. So I very much look forward to your inputs.